Question back here.
Yeah, that's a good point that you raised there, but also be aware that we, Justin Parker, Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission, but at the same time, you know, the tribe's made a concerted effort back in the days of pushing advancing self-governance and making that a reality. And we, you know, pushed as much into the TPA accounts as we could, and they turned around in '96 and axed us, you know, 13% reduction. You know, that's it was pretty harmful for the tribes that we still haven't recovered from that. But you made a comment, Josh, that you know, with the Republicans now in control of the House, that Indian affairs, there's a lot of consensus, but at the same time, you made the comment answering this gentleman's question here about the Indian health care improvement, or reauthorization of Indian health care improvement act. Obviously, that was all encompassing of the health care reform. What was your comment more from a legislative standpoint and not so much from an appropriation standpoint as far as Indian affairs issues in that regard?
Well, actually, I don't have a great hope for improvements in appropriations. I think the appropriations process is, we'll see what happens to earmarks, but I think it's diminishing returns. And certainly with whatever the Republican caucus decide to do, whether they go for a complete ban on earmarks or I've seen Senator Clown backing up from that, Senator Benson saying he's going to force a vote in the Republican caucus in the Senate on ending all congressional earmarks. Appropriations, I think, is going to be a tough environment, an unbelievably tough environment. And then legislatively, yeah, I was speaking legislatively, but since you brought up appropriations, Grant, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. It was tough last. Congress. It's going to be tough in this Congress.
And of course, as you know from watching the process, the Senate and the House have very different rules. The House operates under the premise of whoever has the majority has the gavel, controls the thing, lock, stock, and barrel. And the Republicans, with the 60 vote, you know, the swing, will be able to pretty much pass anything they want to pass and defeat everything they want to defeat. The Senate, even though it's 100 members, you think 51 is a majority. As you know, it takes 60 votes really to do anything in the Senate to stop debate. The Democrats were close at 59-41. Now it's 53. As my old boss Bob Dole used to say, that the Senate was watching the Senate work was like watching paint dry, only duller. The Senate moves very slowly at everything, and so it takes compromise in the Senate to get anything done. And there's going to have to be lots of compromises between the Senate and the House and President Obama, and I think Americans like it. A little gridlock is a good thing for a lot of Americans. So.
Can I just before we break up, I just want to get back to one thing this gentleman said. He was talking about the issue of putting lands in trust. And it goes to I don't know anything about tribal politics in Washington State and what the relations are generally between the governments in Washington, but I'll speak just from my experience in Oregon, and I just want to sign a note here. We have seen in recent years increasing racism, there's no other word for it, that frequently evidences itself when tribes start looking at economic development. Even when the economic development does not involve gaming, and my friends from the Cow Creek tribe here, they've lived through a vicious campaign by a former county commissioner who, even though many people joined together to remove her from office, remains a significant force in Douglas County. She has friends across many of the counties in the state. I can tell you that in this recent election, Mrs. Kilman and her people worked very hard for the Republicans and to defeat Peter DeFazio and to defeat Mr. Kitzhaber. And had they won, they would have had a seat at the table. I don't think that she represents most Republicans by any stretch of the imagination. But I do think it's incumbent on our Republican friends to stand up to this racism with their Democratic friends and tell them that Oregon won't have a part of it. There's my editorial for the day.
And I can assure you that knowing Ms. Gilman as I do, she would not have had a seat at the table. Elizabeth, do you have anything to add or question or offer or wish you were back in Washington, D.C.?
Remember, I was there in '94, so I understand what it feels like. Thank you.
But you won. You won again in '94. So yeah.
A landslide person.
Well, I will say, when you say landslide, I was the only newly elected Democrat who survived in 4 states,
Right.
Western states. So it was like this year was.
Any additional questions? I have one. Would you speculate on how you see the budget moving forward that hasn't been passed in both the lame duck and what might happen in an omnibus?
Wow. Well, on the omnibus, there are feverish discussions going on. And I think they're being aided in part by Republicans because there are many Republicans in Congress who have been there for a while, who have seen this stuff come and go, who work very hard on appropriations bills, and who understand that next Congress is probably going to be very difficult to pass any budgets, appropriations bills. It's going to be unbelievably difficult. And they see this as their last best opportunity to move some of this legislation. There are very few days that I wake up and go, boy, I missed being at my desk, you know, as chief of staff. Yeah, it'd be kind of fun to work on this omnibus because a lot of members are going to know that this is the last train leaving the station, and there's a lot of legislation being considered, including legislation from Oregon. It's been cleared in some cases just by committees, sometimes by one or both houses, but it's still languishing. So if I had to bet, and I think it's at best a 51% proposition, that Congress will manage to move an omnibus that's more than just enough to keep the lights on. That you'll see a lot of legislation cleared, in part because there's a lot of Republicans who know that they're not going to get an opportunity in the next 2 years. But there will, at the same time, be enormous resistance from the Club for Growth and others who were tied in this election to say, wait a second, Republicans, just because you don't have the gavel yet doesn't mean you can be irresponsible, you know, while the Democrats still have the gavel. So I put it at maybe 51%, and maybe and at least 0.5% of that is my my hope intervening, because I worked on about 6 pieces of legislation that are sitting there languishing, and I'd like them to move forward.
Let me just end with a little story, because it proves my point that my old boss Bob Dole used to say, losing an election doesn't mean you lose your sense of humor. And after returning to Oregon, I helped Senator Dole with 2 books on political humor, and one was called Great Presidential Wit, Great Presidential Wit, I Wish I Was in This Book, by Bob Dole. And it's a story of jokes and stories and anecdotes told by our presidents, and we did something that had never been done before. We ranked all the presidents by their sense of humor, from the funniest president to the least funniest president. We called it the Dole Poll. And what we discovered, interestingly enough, for the presidents that we ranked as the funniest, the best sense of humor, were presidents that historians have ranked as the most successful. And presidents that we ranked at the bottom of the biggest sticks in the mud, James Buchanan, Franklin Pierce, Benjamin Harrison, these were all presidents, by the way. They were presidents that historians have ranked as the least successful. And Senator Dole thought it proved a point of his that humor is part of the art of leadership. One of my favorite story of all the presidents, well, I'll end with this, was told about William Howard Taft, who was our 27th president and famous for being our fattest president, weighing in at some 350 pounds. Was nicknamed his rotundity, was his nickname. And Taft took a lot of jokes about his weight, as you might imagine. And the story is told that one time he was with a gaggle of congressmen on Capitol Hill, senators, and talking about something, and one of the senators from New York, a fellow named Chauncey Depew, there's a name for you, Chauncey Depew, walked by, put his hand on the president's stomach and said, Mr. President, what will you be naming the baby? Oh, everybody gasped at the shock of this and the insult to the president by saying something like that. And Taft, who had a fairly good sense of humor, took it in stride. He said, well, you know, he said, if it's a boy, I will name it after President Roosevelt, and I will name it Theodore. If it's a girl, I will give it the Taft family name of Wilhelmina. But if, as I suspect, it is only hot air and gas, I will name it Chauncey Depew. So thanks for listening to Josh's My Hot Air today.
That's what happened to the FCA.